Welcome to Beyond Just Business, the podcast for those who want more. More clarity, more direction, and potentially more meaning. We explore the thinking behind success, the habits that shape performance, and the questions that go deeper than profit margins. If you're ready to challenge the obvious and rethink the way life and business work, you are absolutely in the right place. Okay, so well, Paul, we're back and we're even more handsome than last time. And I think we're wearing different tops to make sure it looks like it's a different setup. You've also copied my glasses, but we're going to let that go. We're looking for sponsorship by Jamie Gill Opticians in Dalkey. I think that's the most important thing. We got to really shoot for that because we've got a nice selection of glasses down there. We got to get a chunk of that. So let's keep that in mind for the next time we're pitching for business. So this week we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. And like everything, this is just going to be a conversation, whatever comes out, and we'll go from there. So what's the meaning of life, Paul? Just thought I'd throw you off for a second. What I find interesting with emotional intelligence is it was often overlooked as being a bit weak. I often think that people thought it was something that you maybe had when you had a deep and meaningful conversation, but it wasn't much use in your professional life. What's been your experience of it, especially in the last number of years since COVID? Because I think a lot of people have had a shift. What have you been seeing?
It's a funny one because a lot of those, I suppose emotional intelligence comes down to feelings. I think, rightly, as you said, Andrew, few people express their feelings. If you go back a number of years in business, you had to be seen as a hard person in some respects, put the best front forward. But everything's changed. Not everything, but a good amount has changed towards understanding other people's feelings. And that's where emotional intelligence has to start. There is a big shift, like I've seen between business owners, between employees, especially the older generation, because I've worked with a lot of those, and they're trying to manage staff of different generations. Each generation is bringing their own differences, for one better word. So it's trying to tackle a lot of those, and that's what's having the biggest impact that I'm seeing. I'm not sure what you're seeing with your clients or what you're coming across.
It's such an interesting one because I think the dynamic has shifted so much. Before, we used to have this internal viewpoint of this guy's a hard ass or this person's a tough taskmaster. And then they kind of parsed off their personality. Maybe you met a friend outside of the workplace and said, oh, they're not like that at all. There's a lot more to them. I think since COVID, there's been an element of people bringing in their personalities. One of the things I view COVID as being was an opportunity for a lot of people to pause and ask, was there something they could change? Is there some element of them that could be a little bit more authentic, whether they verbalize that particular idea or not? And that could have been, the work from home movement. It could have been people changing jobs, changing locations because they didn't have to be in the office every day. But I think the emotional intelligence end of it now is as the best way to describe it is the weak association with it, I think, has been set to the side. So, the kind of idea of your feelings aren't valid, don't talk about that stuff here. You can't be seen as being weak. You're now allowed to strategically bring it in as part of your personality. So you can still be an expert at what you do. You can still be a really good negotiator. You can still be a tough cookie. But I think emotional intelligence has become more acceptable. And I'm seeing it with people. What I find fascinating with it is everyone has their own set of principles. And I think we've talked about this, that you mentioned how many traits are there in the human, how many traits are there?
It's 2,648.
I used to think it was 2,647, so you proved me wrong.
I found a new one at the weekend.
And it's only Monday, so there's more to come. But I think what I found fascinating that you said, what we don't like or don't see or don't like in other people, it's one in ourselves that we're not recognizing or acknowledging. And I think I've noticed with emotional intelligence that you could have someone that's very, very tough in one area of what they do, and in another they're very soft or they're very, very relaxed. And I noticed by taking that objective view that that's just one of those juxtapositions where they decompartmentalize it. But a big part of what I'm seeing now is that there's a bit more humanity to how people do things.
I think there's still seen as a bit of a weakness, though, especially at the higher levels. So if you're at executive level, definitely owner level as well, if you show any element of letting your mask go, touching on the subject matter that a lot of people find difficult to deal with and to discuss. When you talk about mental health, as soon as you mention the word mental health, from an executive perspective and from an owner perspective, the people's reactions are like they take an in-breath, and now they go into a mode whereby, oh geez, I don't know what to say. Now they feel uncomfortable around that individual. I don't think we've reached the area of, I'm not saying that we need to be comfortable, but I think it's understanding the other people's perspective. or the other person's perspective that is going through an issue or a circumstance or a situation. We're talking an awful lot more about feelings. We're talking a lot more about, some mental health issues, but not really the kind of conversations that need to take place. I'll go back to generational level and a middle management level, for example. I think we're having those kind of conversations, but I'm not seeing them in the public arena or in a peer group arena at a much higher level, as in higher executives, CEOs, business owners. I'm not seeing it at that level yet.
It's that classic paying lip service then, and this isn't anti-corporate. I think it's just looking at the dynamics of the workplace and how we all live our lives. Is it that idea of, there's a clip that might go out and say, we're all inclusive and we do X and we do Y. And then the camera cuts and then they grab a glass of whiskey and say, that was a load of crap. Can we get on with the day now? Thanks a million. Because I think there is a trait in people who have that desire to climb the corporate ladder. Obviously, I always say everyone's version of winning is different.
Yeah.
Is there still that element of maybe disingenuous? Well, okay, well, it's the word of the day, like mental health, but it's mental health, but is it?
It's mental health, but it's their perception of what they perceive mental health to be. I remember having a conversation with somebody I knew well a number of years ago when he got off the phone. His daughter rang him to say that her friend had suicided. And he got off the phone because I was there with him at the time. The conversation went into, he just didn't get it. He literally just did not understand suicide, understand mental health from that perspective, understand why anybody would do it or how anybody would do it. It was like as if somebody was trying to tell him about ice cream, but he had never even tasted or seen ice cream before. It was so alien to him that he literally just could not understand. So some people agree with you in terms of they kind of play lip service in some respects because they don't really get it and they have to be seen to be doing something along those lines, because if they don't, you just can't continue in business if you're not doing something from that perspective. But then on the other side, I think there's an awful lot of people that just don't want to let that mask down. They don't want to have those conversations for fear of what might actually happen. So there is, there's shame attaching to it. There's guilt attaching to it. There's the fear of, will they lose business? Will they lose people and clients and colleagues and friends and all that kinds of things? There's all of those that come into the mix and they play the role of wearing a mask, which is hugely, 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 like from an energy perspective, it takes a huge amount of energy to be and present yourself with that front all the time, 24/7, without having some kind of release or relief in being able to handle it and to deal with it.
And I suppose that there will always be people who like being a certain way. There are people who kill people and thoroughly enjoy it, not to compare corporate to serial killers. There are, people that can be sorry for what they do or have a regret. If you were looking at the percentage of people you may have come across, and I suppose I find it fascinating because I'm very mindful of my own inner dialogue and it skews my opinion. I look at someone in a corporate position and see both sides of it. They're in a great position, a high rank or whatever it may be in a company. They've got good income, great support system, infrastructure, international job opportunities. If that's what that person really wanted, amazing. Absolutely delighted for them. But there is that slight doubt in my mind as to how many people actually thoroughly enjoy. Every job, every part of life, there is an element of challenge and things that have to get done. We all know that. You can't have night without day and vice versa. But if you took a secret poll and everyone is super honest, like sitting in the confessional, and they ticked the box, yes or no, fulfilled or unfulfilled, happy or not, regretful, I wonder how many people actually just love the idea of corporate. This is not meant to be anti-corporate, but it fascinates me because even the language that people use in everyday life, I could meet someone and you're having a chat about the weather and they've used the equivalent amount of words as if it was a memorandum going around an office about a merger. And I'm like, I didn't need all of that. That was just, you can just talk normal, but they've almost lost that natural way to relate to people. Do you think someone can actually climb the corporate ladder by saying, look, this is who I am. I'm emotionally intelligent, but I'm really good at what I do. I care about your feelings, but there's also stuff that has to get done. So someone's that has got that balance. Have you come across anyone, even publicly, who would have that kind of ability to manage both sides of that?
I think it's very rare. I'm kind of going through my mind in terms of, okay, who are the people that would come across? I honestly think I've yet to find somebody that is truly balanced and able to get everything they want from life and climb the corporate ladder. I know that seems stark to observe, but I've yet to come across somebody. I've met so many CEOs, executives, and so on, and what they will reveal that they've given up on is huge. And there is an element of guilt with them. There's an element of resentment with them. And at some point, I've come across so many people that want to exit corporate life. And it's funny, this episode is not about bashing corporate, but I've come across so many people that want to exit corporate life because they're working no end of hours. Yes, to get the financial reward. Yes, to get the recognition and the acknowledgement of they're climbing up to different positions and all that. But the flip side of that, the sacrifice they make is absolutely huge. Really, the only ones are the ones at the top, because I don't know whether it's a case that they feel they have to stay at the top. If they drop in any way, well, then that's their whole life gone, because that's their identity gone. I've seen some people that have exited or changed. I've worked with them, and the difference that it's made for them is, while they may not have the huge financial rewards that they would have because they're pursuing a different path, the rewards that they get in their life as a whole is like, they'll say themselves, it's chalk and cheese, it's black and white. I think, honestly, and again, I've personal connections with some people on this front. I've really yet to see or come across somebody that is genuinely happy in the corporate life that they're in. As far as they're concerned, it's something that they have to do. The number of people I've come across that won't leave because the handcuffs are so much, as in those financial handcuffs, it's too much for them. And again, it's the image that they've built up, and they're worried about what other people might think. If they were to change a path or do something completely different, resign the title they've had, those handcuffs are too much for some people.
And do you think there's particular industries that'll, like, I'm looking at it now, and I suppose I would follow Gary Vaynerchuk, who'd be well known on YouTube and everything else, and he would have the terms radical empathy. He'd be very emotionally intelligence driven, where he can see where someone is coming from, but he still has to get the job done. And he'd be quite self-aware. He's in that rarefied, he saw YouTube before YouTube was a thing. You know, he hopped on it and did what was called wine library for a long time. He would be the outlier as opposed to someone in, you know, JP Morgan or any other company. I'm not advocating for or against anything like that. Everyone's version or everyone's lens of life is different. One person grew up and they wanted to be a solicitor, a doctor, an accountant, whatever it may be. When you think of the dynamics of the workplace, money nowadays has become like 100 grand when you look at what social media has done. Social media has diminished 100 grand in earnings as if it was 15 quid cutting the grass. And it's almost lost all meaning. When people look at what they can do lifestyle wise, they probably don't realize that on the other side of that barrier is freedom in so many ways. But because they have a route, they can't deviate beyond it after a certain point because it's too good. Like you said, those golden handcuffs are there. If you even said, I'll let you do this particular job. I saw it when people went into startups. You know, they went from corporate, they scratched that startup itch. And as soon as they're in a room full of people having beers on a Friday and they're not wearing a suit and tie, and board meetings are board meetings, but they're not because they're with VCs, it was a totally different animal. They kind of lose the run of all the things they knew. So they were in a certain jungle. There were certain rules. They were able to play by them. They understood the dynamics. They understood the interpersonal arrangement, whether spoken or unspoken. And then when they were cast into a different arena, it was like someone who'd been in captivity all their life and then they were set free and they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's vice versa. Like, you throw me into an office now with a suit and tie and I'm in a room full of 20 people. There is only so long I can hold my tongue before I say something. I might come across as the cheesy guy who says, look, I just got to say it as it is. The door is that way, Andrew. But maybe the other side of it is I haven't been in it, so I can't relate to it. But when I think of the world we live in now, the possibilities are limitless. I also think jobs have never been more unsafe in the grand scheme of life. Nothing is forever anymore. When I see the transition in the role of technology, the role of remote work, whether people like it or not, there will be certain positions in businesses that will become obsolete, or they won't encourage you to do it if you want to advance in any particular company. But that to me speaks more to that there's opportunity everywhere. You could do anything you want.
I don't think there's ever been a better time. If you look at what can be done with the internet, what can be done with social media, what can be done with AI, it's just, I've never come across a better time, right, to be quite honest. And I like that. I agree with you. No job is ever safe. What really kills me, because I see it so often, is people being let go because there's a turn in the market, or the job that they've had for, say, 20 years is now, they're literally thrown on the scrap heap. And that is hugely disheartening, because you can see the impact on the individuals. They believe that they're going to be with the company until either the company goes for IPO or it's sold, and lo and behold, they wake up one morning to an email to say their job's gone. Talk about emotional intelligence. That's just not the way to do it.
It's not, but if we take devil's advocate, is that a naivety on the part of employees who go in somewhere and take what they can get? They get paid for X, Y, Z. If they're in late, it's not that big a deal. If they got a few sick days to use, let's imagine the other side of the coin. They don't understand the stresses of trying to find a $500,000 to keep the lights on, bring on deals and do delivery. Do you think there's an element of, and I'm like, they're almost quietening that part of their mind that said, that asks questions? They might say, if I ask questions in the short term, it starts off being the short term, but then, like you said, it turns into 20 years. So you've gotten your company car, you've moved through the ranks slowly but surely, or you've maintained a certain position, and you almost have that naivety that, well, I'm one of the team now. I am one of the founders. I've been here since the beginning. But if there was a bad month, you didn't have to cough up your money. You didn't have to find an overdraft, make a deal, or restructure debt. Is it maybe a disconnect? Does that mean that the owners should be on owners to explain a bit more and say, like a lot of the companies who build in public, this is what's happening, this is cash flow, this is where we're at, and this is the reality of owning a business, and you're a part of it. But if we go belly up tomorrow, you might equally do the same to me. You might disappear. You're not going to work for free for 6 months and hope we can build another version of this.
I don't think it comes into their mind. As an employee, it doesn't enter their mind that they see that they're actually giving more to the employer than what they consider they are. And in a lot of cases, I'm not talking for everybody, but they feel that they deserve to get paid, to have the holidays, all the benefits and all the kind of things. They don't even contemplate what it's like to try and find that payroll, or a large client hasn't paid them and their cash flow is thrown out, and the owner is trying to figure out, okay, so what on earth are they going to do with the business? They don't see that. Honestly, because again, I've listened to many conversations around tables at dinners and not hearing people that are in the public service and their views of work, hearing employees that are in companies, both large and small, and hearing the conversation that comes out of them. It's worrying, to be quite honest, in some respects, but not surprising on the other side. And again, this isn't about bashing employees or corporates. It's more around what's actually real out there. But this gets back down to the fundamental issue. Very few people, which again goes back to emotional intelligence, very, very few people look at something from the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
And it's all about the other person's perspective. So when you start to live your life from even just considering what's it like for the other person, I think you're opening the doors to real emotional intelligence, as opposed to trying to look at it from your perspective, through your lens, through your own belief system, and not taking the time out to actually, because again, you go back to the old adage, whatever that phrase is, walk a day in my shoes, or again, I can't remember the full phrase, but it's, you'll learn an awful lot from actually just visualizing what it's like from somebody else's perspective. And that's huge. Very few people do that in all walks of life, let alone employees, corporates, business owners. It could be relationships, family dynamics, it could be anything. You can apply that perspective to any part of your life. It's stepping into somebody else's shoes.
It's probably an interesting one because emotional intelligence is something that I think I always came equipped with. I wasn't Rain Man and able to put together a spreadsheet in my mind and tell you how many matches fell on the floor with one glance. I think I probably overlooked it. Whereas if I had a photographic memory, that to me would spring to mind as being something really special. Like, this is something I can utilize to my advantage in my relationships, my interpersonal relationships, professionally. And in what I do now, I think emotional intelligence is a key factor to how I can help people, because I notice things that others may not. Because I notice it, I almost discount it. So I'm imagining, oh, everyone should think that way. And then when I don't encounter it in someone else, there's the other example where I'm not seeing it through their lens either. They're extremely analytical. They've got a certain way about them where they can put an idea together in a situation that I would find very difficult, and to them it's second nature. So will it always be polarizing? Is that human nature? What's inherently normal to me isn't normal to someone else.
It's human being.
So we're all screwed then. This is what
Yeah.
Join us next week for our end of the world edition.
Because when you bring back to what, where I discussed the pendulum, there's always going to be people on one side and people on the other side. You get somebody that's hugely empathic and somebody on the other side that's completely narcissistic. And all they consider is themselves. They don't think about anybody else or what their impact is on anybody else. You'll have both ends of every spectrum and everything in between. But can you develop for an individual themselves and bring back into equilibrium or the midpoint? Yeah. That starts with, okay, what's the impact on somebody else, or what are they going to be experiencing or expecting, or what's their perspective or what's their feelings. It's starting with those and start to understand from their side. But I think we've always got to have that in human nature, because we've got to see that contrast. It's the only way we can observe, the only way we can learn is by having contrast.
It's probably why a lot of people are still going to be at odds. I think when I look at some businesses or enterprises and they do very well, sometimes I'm looking at it with my eye, which is skewed like everybody's. I have a different lens in my own way. I'm keenly aware of that. But when I look at a certain idea or a business and it's like the business is making serious money, it's got serious growth or it's scaling. And in my mind, I'm looking at it with my version of how I view the world. I go, God, that doesn't seem right. How is this business growing? Because this person or the leadership team clearly has no concept of X. But that's also where you have to separate humanity and business, because there is that element where people have a natural disposition for making money, bringing an idea to the market, executing on it, but ask them to have a tough conversation around a coffin or equivalent, and they just mightn't have the bandwidth.
They can't.
Is it something we like to juxtapose? And, I'm on one side saying, well, if only they came over to my side, and then they're on my side, and if only they could see it from my side. Will that always be the case? Because when I think of AI now, I think, and people talk about, especially in sales, that they think that the advent of AI is going to really bring human interaction to the fore. So is this where those with emotional intelligence will get actually a bit of a leg up versus someone who's maybe a little bit more analytical? Like, are they going to be behind the curve?
I think we will. Because that's one thing we can differentiate between AI, is that understanding and emotion. But also the insights that we bring. And again, you bring those with EQ. AI can't bring those, because AI is data. It's bringing the whole data together and coming up with either a proposal or a decision or a recommendation or whatever and so on. But ask AI, I haven't seen it as of yet, and whether it's going to evolve to this, perhaps it will, I don't know. But it's the human being that actually sits back and says, what if we were to create X? I don't know whether AI would be able to do that, as in to create something that hasn't existed so far. I don't know. I can't see how AI is going to do it. And that's where human beings are really going to be, where they're creating new things and new ways of how we can actually live.
See, I find it interesting because when I think of emotional intelligence and the role people play in a business, you can have someone that's worked in a business for 10 years, 20 years, and they are the linchpin of that business, let's say from a customer facing position or operations. And then you look at AI agents. Yes, you have to educate them. Yes, you have to tell them about what it is you want, your personality, your business, or whatever it is you want. It doesn't matter whether you want. I saw an interesting article at the weekend from someone who basically created a ChatGPT therapist because they were fed up paying 150 or 200 quid every time they went to speak to someone who would obviously be subject to the human condition, which is tiredness, being hungover, fed up. They had a difficult client beforehand. ChatGPT, you pay it 25 quid a month. You can do what you want. And I'm not selling it, but I think when you look at opportunity as people see it to broaden their perspective horizons, is there something where emotional intelligence will become faked by AI? Like, so what's that movie, Ex Machina with Donald Gleason? He goes into a bunker of a really quirky founder, and the founder wants to test him dealing with this kind of a robot or an android, whatever you call it. It happens to be in the look of a woman. And it's all of these interactions, and they all play around what's real, what's not, what's she feigning, what's she genuine about, how does she understand the mechanism of the, a deep and meaningful conversation. The founder's watching him. So it's a really skewed view on the human condition, because you're trying to think, well, is the robot trying to trick him, or is he trying to trick him, or is the robot tricking everybody? You don't know which way is up. And it's only a movie. So when I look at the emotional intelligence side of things, I just wonder what role human interaction will play as we become more automated. So we have conversations. It's important to have chats. It's important to connect with people. What's going to happen when 90% of things are done for you? It's like someone who's on their laptop all day long coding. There will be a natural disposition to either stay coding or just avoid a conversation. Will emotional intelligence become kind of like the white snow leopard? You don't see it very often. Or will it be something that will really, people say, no, we have to look after this. We have to nurture this in relationships and businesses, or even interpersonally.
Okay, if you're to ask for what would I predict, I think we're going to have both. I think we're going to have much more people operating from a higher consciousness perspective. And with that comes emotional intelligence. And you have machine learning, which is the AI side of things. I think we're just going to future develop. If you look at everything right now, I'm just looking from a prediction point of view. If you look at everything that's happening right now at the moment in terms of industry, all industries are being broken down. Like the financial systems have been breaking down, have been broken anyway for quite a while, but they're continuing to break down. Religious orders are breaking down. If you look at the political systems, you just got to look at the world and see what's happening right now at the moment from the political side of things. And it's completely, again, it's there's a huge amount of change happening and a lot of power being moved away. If you look at industry, which goes back to the corporate world, that's been broken down right now. People aren't seeing it from that perspective. They're trying to go back to the old ways of doing things. But the old ways aren't going to work. We've got to change. We've got to evolve. Industries are being broken down. Manifesting is by way of the work from home or remote working. Everything is shifting more towards higher level of consciousness from a human perspective. If you look at sexuality, it's no longer the binary of male and female. That binary situation is completely being removed, and it will be removed over the next number of years or over the next decade. So every single system we have is being broken down. Think of being broken down as being dismantled. When something is dismantled, it gives the opportunity for something new to be grown. So again, it's the universal law of transmutation. It has to go, energy has to shift into something else. So what does the new look like? I'm having very few conversations along those lines, as opposed to people looking behind them in the rearview mirror and saying, okay, no, I still want more of the past and bring forward the past. Yeah, but what if we were to start with a clean slate and say, okay, what could we actually create? What would the future potential look like? And what does AI, along with human and high level consciousness, actually look like? They're much better conversations, because that's where the world has massive opportunities of what it actually could become. But we're not having those conversations. They're not happening in the boardroom because they're trying to deal with the 3-year strategy or the 5-year strategy or what's going to happen with the tariffs and so on. So they're dealing with the day-to-day as well as the short term, but longer. They're not looking longer term because that's what they don't get paid for. And they don't get paid to look much further from that perspective because the shareholder value has to be delivered each year. They're the more interesting questions. I feel more interesting conversations in terms of, okay, so what's the possibility? What could be?
I'd say that statement would probably scare a lot of people. So if you were to look at it, and I think historically when you look at, I mean, a movie that you recommended to me that I thoroughly enjoy was Meet Joe Black. And one of the things that I find, if anyone hasn't seen it, it's got Brad Pitt and it's got Anthony Hopkins in it and just a phenomenal cast. But what's really prominent throughout that movie is the interactions in the boardroom. And you got the old world, honor, which I will say that's a big feature in the movie. That kind of stalwart gentleman type, stoic, has a certain way about him. There's a battle between someone who wants to build a company up to a certain point and break it down and sell it off for pieces. Then you've got someone who's built it with his bare hands. So you can understand why people would be holding on to the past. But how would someone, let's just even, like, as a normal conversation, we're sitting down having a coffee. I can't fathom how someone would have thought of the internet in any other terms other than how I understand it now. But if someone came to me now, which is AI, and said, this is going to be the internet for whatever. Like I know this week they said, there's a guy I know who's put out the memo that Bill Gates sent out to Microsoft when the World Wide Web was launched. He said, this is the next big thing. We need to be on this. We need to be on top of this, whatever it may be. And back then, like that's visionary stuff. That's someone who sees, the Matrix style. But for the ordinary Joe Soap or someone, not necessarily Joe Soap, we give ourselves a bit of credit, but let's have someone who's trying to imagine what that future would look like. Where do you even start? Because like someone could say, well, I use ChatGPT, and ChatGPT's gone from being a word that like, wow, this is an elusive thing, to where, my stepmom has it. I've built a little app for her where she knows how it works. Now it's like, yeah, sure, what's your next trick? Understanding what the future of business or people's working lives could look like. But where do you even start if you're not technically minded?
It's the sci-fi movies.
They go back and watch them like documentaries.
Honestly, for me, it's the sci-fi movies because that'll give you a glimpse of what's actually possible. You take Tony Stark in the Avengers movies, not particularly sci-fi, but it's more Marvel movies. Tony Stark's interaction with AI will give you a glimpse of what's potentially possible in the future and what will come in the future very quickly. So that's on one side. But there's been so many examples of all different sci-fi movies of what would have been seen as being that's completely impossible years and years ago when the movie came out to what would actually be the norm now, or considered the norm, or considered absolutely possible. Those certain things within movies have actually come to fruition. And the gas thing is, when you look at it from an intuitive perspective, somebody had the inspired thought to put that into a movie, create a movie around it. But that was, the universe is always perfect, nothing's ever missing. That gave somebody else the impetus. That's really cool. Let's create that. If you go back to another movie I love, which is the first one, which is Avatar. Avatar shows how human beings will interact with future beings. Let's consider through that particular lens. I'm not talking about aliens. I'm not talking about, this, that, or UFOs and so on. If you look at the human beings that were in that movie, they were basically destroying everything on Earth. And then you had futuristic beings trying to develop the Earth and bring a completely higher consciousness energy into the world. When you start to look at it through that lens, that's likely to be a prediction of the future. Now, is that a prediction of the future? You can see it playing out right now at the moment in terms of, what's happening in the Amazon, all the kind of things, what's happening in the wars, all of that's happening in the movie. It was portrayed slightly differently, but all that was presented in the movie. And you can see an awful lot of higher level consciousness coming through to try and, for want of a better word, to help human beings in how we can actually live better. Because you can ask most people, are you living? And the answer for the vast majority of people is no. Because again, they're either working every hour that God sends, or they are just disgruntled, unfulfilled, and unhappy in the vast majority of the work that they're doing. So are they living? No, they're not.
You see, anyone who hears certain words like consciousness, they'll switch off. That's also an advertisement almost. We've been advertised to or marketed to for a long time about working hard, the 9 to 5. There's obviously a narrative where people, I think someone said, they did an interesting interview where they explained that Henry Ford didn't write a book on what really made him successful, because he said, if I did, no one would be in the factory working for me. So there's the other side of it, where I think you could become a brain surgeon by virtue of the articles that are online, technically not legally, by virtue of the access to information we have. But there are people who just don't want to do that. We've never before had more information, but never before been more constrained by our mindset. I think it's also the unlearning. And I am the first when I think about this, which is, if times are tough, or you're trying to think of something, or if you're a little light in an area, I got to beat the living Jenny Mac out of this to get it going. I've got to be up there grinding. I have to get it done. I have to be seen to be busy. I can't take my foot off the gas, because there isn't that reserve of funds or that level of success that I would deem whatever. But then ironically, the times I've let go is the times when things have happened in the most unlikely of ways. And that is almost a natural order of things, So like you said, with the idea of an Avatar movie, which is you wake up, you're grateful for what's around you, you take what you need, you don't pillage, you use it, you respect it. So you're not littering metaphorically or physically, because you're respecting the environment, and it's kind of that symbiotic thing.
Yep.
But we are very consumerist now. See, when you say futuristic, I think Demolition Man. I think the movie with Sylvester Stallone in the 90s and Wesley Snipes. I remember swearing was illegal. You got fined in public because he did it. You weren't allowed to use toilet paper. I can see the merits of that, but the 3 seashells I'm not getting into. I never figured that one out. And salt was deemed unhealthy, therefore illegal. So, as was alcohol. So when I look at that, that's the decision for yourself to be taken away. So for me, I think everyone has the right to live their lives the way they want to, but that almost reached the darker side of the future, which is, well, the world got so bad that someone had to decide what was good for you.
Yeah, and you could actually see that coming forward as well. And you could see it being real right now at the moment.
There's a darkness out there.
Yeah, there is. All the CCTV cameras. So you can imagine, like in the movie, if I remember the movie right, there were similar, basically, you're issued tickets. So you're being monitored 24/7, which again goes back to George Orwell's 1984. You could actually see that happening. That's where I think there's a divergence happening. There's always both sides. There's that side of mentality, which is the likes of the Hunger Games, 1984, or Demolition Man. You got all of that kind of side of things happening, which is one potential for the future. And you got the other potential, which is the avatars.
So for any of our doomsday preppers, do you go into the Hunger Games camp or do you take the Avatar camp? Because, you can sit around all day teaching people how to be a better person and live for the future. And then a fella comes along and stabs you in the back of the head. I told you to prepare. But I used the wrong one. Joking aside, I look at that and I don't want to look at a dystopian future. I wouldn't want to live in a dystopian future. We're getting slightly off grid, but the concept is the same, where my house is boarded up and I don't trust anyone and I assume everyone's out to get me, versus a world where life has been reimagined. Quality time with loved ones is different. Respecting the elderly is different. The concept of working is different by virtue of what it is you want from life and what you're being rewarded with. It's not just a load of money in a bank that you can only buy so many things with. And don't get me wrong, they're lovely things. I aspire to buy things myself. That's fine. But I think when I equate where the world is going, is there an element where we are getting very back to the future now? Aside from having a fax machine in every room like they did in the movie and wearing 2 ties, things are on demand. There's a real dystopian feel to it. Even places when it comes to food being real or not and the quality of it and the haves and the have-nots and the price of living. Is it going to give people an opportunity to explore what life could look like, or are they just going to have to go with it? Because there will be some people who can't imagine. A day is frantic enough as it is, but pausing to wonder where it's all going or what it's all about, I think 95% of people don't. And the other 5% of people either have a trust fund or they've escaped up the mountains in the Himalayas.
Arrives in a microwave.
Yeah.
Or the equivalent of. Okay, let me put it this way, and this may seem real cruel. The vast majority of people follow. The vast majority of people are sheep. I don't mean that to be cruel. I don't mean that to be kind of derogatory, but that's human nature. That's how it is. It relies in some respects on some pioneers in the world to actually create what the future looks like. That can be dangerous. It can be dystopian, or it can be really opening. So again, somebody had to think of an iPhone. It was a thought, first of all. So somebody had to think of an iPhone or a smartphone. If you talk to somebody kind of maybe even 30, 40 years ago, that you could actually walk around with a phone, that will be completely alien to somebody back then. So we need the leaders and pioneers in the world that create what the future could potentially look like. If you listen to conversations, the vast majority of people don't think along those lines as regards the potential of the future. They literally hang on to the past. They hang on to what has been and what's been the evidence of the past as opposed to the potential of the future. Very few people look at that side of things. Again, that's just my experience.
But is that their point of reference though? Like, let's say using the iPhone example and we're looking at emotional intelligence. I can't pretend that I knew anything about Steve Jobs with any depth aside from reading articles or watching interviews, but he wouldn't have struck me as someone who's emotionally intelligent. He struck someone who had a vision, he had a determination, and he had a tremendous talent for marketing and bringing people together and getting the best out of them. But let's look at that. If we were looking back at this retrospective with emotional intelligence, with great power came great responsibility. He created something, or he instilled in a team to create something great with Steve Wozniak. Let's take how the two of them went. Steve Wozniak got to a point where he said, I've made a few quid and jeez, I'm actually knackered now. I'm done. This is totally not what I want. This has become boardroom dancing type of stuff. You're trying to survive one year to the next. Whereas Steve Jobs had a certain way of doing things. He had a driver within him, whether it had no off switch or not. And then when you look at his eventual death, he will be remembered forever, more so than someone like me will be. But I look at that and I kind of go, there's kids that are left behind with loads of money, great, but they don't have their dad. And maybe that's my emotional intelligence lens. But when you think of how people could change the future, will it require both, or someone who does what's needed and people fashion it in a different way? So someone like the Steve Jobs type, you're going to have a breakdown, stuff is going to go wrong, by God, we're going to get it done. And then at the end of it, someone else might come in and fancy it up a little bit.
But if you look back over history, the vast majority have all been closer to the higher narcissistic spectrum. So Steve Jobs would be considered being narcissistic. So very, very low emotional intelligence and high narcissism. And you need a lot of those in order to get stuff done. Because the narcissist doesn't care what other people think. So when you see a lot of people that, so for example, if you're high in emotional intelligence and somebody says, that's a really bad idea, your natural reaction is, maybe it is a bad idea. Maybe I should give that up for Game Soldiers.
You read my diary again.
Somebody that's on a higher narcissistic spectrum will say, well, screw you, I'm still going ahead and do it. If you look at Elon Musk, everybody would have given out about, and still do, give out about Elon Musk, but yet he brought a huge amount of innovation to the car industry. I don't think there's any one car right now at the moment, I'm sure there is, but unless it's the bespoke cars and the higher level cars. The vast majority of cars, because I've been looking at cars over the last couple of weeks, but the vast majority of cars that you go into a car showroom have a large screen.
Mm.
That's what they have. If you look at the high range, the i7, for example, BMW, it's a full screen, literally the full width of the dashboard. That's, go back to pre-Elon Musk days, the consideration of putting the big, huge iPad in your car would be unthinkable, but now it's the norm. So what I'm saying is, and again, Elon Musk is well known for being narcissistic and having an extremely low level of emotional intelligence. He fully admits it. He absolutely says that. So I think you need, in industry, you need those individuals to really push things through and not necessarily listen to the masses, because sometimes the masses are wrong in so many different industries, where you've got to have somebody that just stick to their guns and say no, because they've got the inspiration. They know what the future could potentially be. Very few times, there's times that they're wrong, but very infrequently. They fail fast, but they learn from their failures and move forward. Somebody and this is kind of the downside for high EQ, you get consumed with your emotions and your feelings and what other people might think. So again, there's always both sides. If you get consumed by what other people might think, you can get into paralysis.
Yeah, and when you say that to round this conversation off about emotional intelligence, you say that, and then there's times when I would have said, I wish I could be like such and such so I could just get X done. And then the other side of it is, I couldn't sleep at night if someone did, whatever it may be. But I'm wishing I was a way that I am not, and that's just the way it is. But if you were to try and sell the concept, let's just imagine, someone's standing in front of you and you got, let's say, the proverbial Pepsi and the Coke machine. And one's emotional intelligence and the other one, I'm not saying which, one's emotional intelligence, I'm not saying narcissism, but some broad stroke of the opposite, of that gets stuff done, that you could be remembered, that you will execute ideas better, but the reasoning and motivations are different. How would you sell emotional intelligence to someone? Because even as you say that there, Musk is going to be remembered, Buffett's going to be remembered, all these people are going to be remembered for the action they take, the execution that the ability they have to execute. And then the emotional intelligence might be, let's imagine if I was to slightly overcook it a bit, I would have had a few nice conversations here and there and people thought I was nice. If you got someone that wants to achieve something, they look at emotional intelligence as a weakness. They're going to go, geez, I don't want that. I'd rather have the hardness and then I'll figure it out afterwards.
Because there's very few individuals that will be considered being remembered ones. So the Steve Jobs, because again, it's got to be a product that goes to the masses. So it depends on what products people are developing. If it's to go to the global masses, well, then now you're going to have the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks of this world and so on. For the vast majority of businesses, you're not going to the global masses. In my mind, the answer will always come back to equilibrium. Taking your Coke and Pepsi analogy, it's getting a new can and pouring half to one and half the other into the one can. So now you've got a mixture of both. So now you're creating something new, which is the equilibrium point between the two.
Apparently that's a trend in the States, by the way. Mixing Coke and Diet Coke, but I never thought of mixing Pepsi and Coke. They mightn't physically be allowed meat, like they might just explode their hand. Just to round it off, the last thing, you mentioned all the different people, obviously prolific people who are leaders. Is there anyone famous, or is there anyone who people might notice that would have that high EQ that has made their mark in the world, that might make people more curious about exploring it?
So people would naturally consider the likes of Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, people that pursued visions or missions that were more altruistic, which is the opposite to narcissism.
Okay. That'll be an in-depth read for someone, you never know. Yeah. So we'll leave it there until the next time, Paul. Thanks a million. And that's it for another episode of Beyond Just Business. If it gave you something to think about, or it helped you see things a little differently, we're delighted. But make sure you're following so you don't miss out on the next episode. Stay curious, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.